Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Quick little video here specifically around getting your telemetry system to log data parameters like your Accessport does. So we covered this a while ago, maybe like 2 years ago or whatever, and I've had to do it again because the car has been retuned. And I, in the past, thought that retunes wouldn't be a problem and that the telemetry system would still be able to query the ECU and get all the data that I was looking for. I'm incorrect. Clearly something has changed in where Cobb programs tables in the ECU, and so I had to go back and essentially remap everything out. And in the process of doing that, I learned a couple of tricks and a couple of things that may or may not help you guys if you're looking to do something similar. So I thought I would make a quick video on what those tricks are and hopefully kind of save you guys from making the same mistakes. So quickly, as like a refresher here, 2024 CAN ID 2024 on a Subaru, that's the ID on which an ECU replies on, right? So whenever a diagnostic tool makes a CAN specific diagnostic request to the ECU is going to reply on CAN ID 2024. Also on a Subaru, the diagnostic tool will send packets on CAN ID 2016. Right? So essentially what I've done is set up my telemetry system with a script that enables it to dump everything it sees on the CAN bus network, right? Hopefully your telemetry system has something like that. I'm assuming if you can program your telemetry system, you can program it to dump your script out. That's just one of the benefits of the Racecapture system. And then let's see here. What you also want to then do is, so now you've got your telemetry system, it can dump the CAN bus network. You want to go to your Accessport and go to the area where you select the parameters that it logs when you hit the logging button, right? This is gonna, when you hit that button, the Accessport starts to send out a bunch of requests to the ECU, and it's sending out requests based on what you select in this list. Write that list down in the order in which it appears, which is what I've done here. Okay, so now you've got all the parameters selected and you want to start logging. Okay, very important. If you're in like a 6 gauge mode or a 3 gauge mode, switch it into single gauge mode. Okay, and then whatever parameter you select in single gauge mode, if you have to make more than one CAN dump, make sure you're on the same parameter, and I'll explain that in a second. All right, so once you've got all the parameters you want, you're in single gauge mode, you've chosen a parameter that you will always use in single gauge mode, hit the logging button, and your data logger will start to dump all of the packets on the network. So I've got them all here in the spreadsheet, and the first thing I'm going to do is filter them to 2016. So these are all the packets that the data logger saw, or the telemetry data logger saw, and I've put them over here, and what I've done is organized them out, right? So 2016, these are all the packets that are being sent from the Accessport to the ECU, at least on a Subaru ECU, and typically, if you think of this as an entire request, it starts with 16, ends with 48 in ID or byte position 0. And all of these 33, 34, 35, 36, I call those all those are all like sub IDs. Those allow you to kind of sort that entire frame into a message that makes sense, because you then can look at them sequentially. On a Subaru, that starts at 33 and then runs until however long that kind of request is. All right, so I've got that, and then I've got another sheet here that quickly adds on things I need to program my data logger. And then the next thing you want to do is go back and get all the ones that are get all the packets that are replies from the ECU to those packets that you sent from the data logger, or from your Accessport. Right, so 2024, grab those, plop them down over here, and then sort through them again. starting with sub ID 16, ending at sub ID 48, and then sequentially putting the packets in. Okay, so at this point, you have all the packets that the Accessport is sending to the ECU as a request, and you have all the packets that the ECU is replying to the Accessport's requests. Now you need to figure out and decode. Now you need to figure out which byte is what, and then the formula to decode that byte value into a real-world formula. Okay, so remember how I said single gauge is important? This is like pro tip number 2. Single gauge is important, and making sure you're always on the same parameter is important, because for whatever reason, that is the first parameter that is replied by the ECU, I think. I don't know if it always happens, but it seems to be the case. And if you keep changing this single gauge parameter around, you may get unlucky, and one parameter might be 1 byte, and the next parameter that you change it to might be 2 bytes. And if that happens and you're trying to compare 2 different data logs, everything is going to shift over by the difference in the number of bytes replied on for those parameters, right? So if, for example, you're on DAM, and then you suddenly change it to boost, and DAM was 1 byte and boost is 4 bytes, if you're trying to compare those 2 different logs, one of them is going to have bytes shifted over by 4, and it makes it super confusing. So if you have to make another log for whatever reason, make sure that the single gauge is set to the same parameter that you started with. That one caused me some headaches there for a little bit. Okay, the other thing is, minus the sub ID, you only have, well, let me rephrase. The other thing is, because parameters can be 1 bytes or 2 bytes or 3 bytes or 4 bytes, you have to make sure that those parameters are falling within one packet, meaning they don't span across 2 different packets, right? You could probably custom program something into your data logger that says look at the end of one packet and look at the beginning of another packet and then do some math on that. But it's a lot more of a headache. So if you can select a configuration of parameters such that they all end in the same packet and don't start in another packet, it makes life much easier. So for this list of parameters, that happens to be the case. And I don't have anything that starts in one packet and ending in another, right? So that makes life super easy. Okay, and you can see here I've highlighted colors so I know which bytes are for what parameter. And obviously you need to do that. And so here comes my third and final trick. Okay, so with your data logger still in sort of the can dumping mode, create channels on the data logger to look at the replies from the ECU. So that's what I've done here. You can see I've created channels that look at CAN ID 2024, and for every single channel, I'm looking at every possible byte, 0 through 7. And so what I can do here is I can set, with this running, and I'm looking at the dashboard, I can't show it to you because I don't have my telemetry system connected. With this running, I can go through my Accessport in single gauge mode and change a parameter to say AF correction. And I will more than likely, because it's just one parameter, I'll get 2 different CAN packets. One with a sub ID of 16, which is the start of the frame or the message, and 48, that's like the end. And in 16, the second byte I think tells the device essentially how many bytes to look at or how long this message is going to be. And then the second byte, or I guess in this case the third byte, tells that tool after this byte, then we start with the information that you're asking for, right? So on a sub ID of 16, really the message starts in byte number 4 or ID number 4 or ID number 3. It's kind of confusing. And so you can look at that on your telemetry system and one by one start changing the single gauge parameter on your Accessport. And you should see a value pop up. probably in channel 3 and channel 4, and depending on how many bytes that parameter consists of, you may see from 3, 4, or all the way to 7. I don't know. It can vary from car to car. But that will quickly enable you to figure out in this entire reply frame from the ECU where things are, like which bytes correspond to which parameters. And what I found is they're all in order, except for the very first. Don't forget, right? In this log, I had DAM. I had chosen DAM as my single gauge parameter. That came first, right? So it's out of order here in this list, but everything else is in order, right? The only confusing part is if a byte value happens to be 0, right? So in some cases, like for example, like AF correction, I set that on my single gauge mode, looked at the bytes that were coming off the data logger, and I saw 128, and I knew, boom, 128, AF correction. Did that for AF learn. Oh, I saw 128 again. I know the next byte, AF learn. I did air fuel ratio, and I looked on the data logger, and I only saw 32. And I go, okay, well, 32 must be air fuel ratio, right? And I just marked that, and then I went on to barometer. And I was thinking I should see 0, or barometer pressure or barometric pressure. I was thinking I should see 0, but instead I saw 102. So what that told me was more than likely air fuel ratio was actually 2 bytes, right? And because, you know, it was 0, I just, there's no way I would have known, right? So it was moving on to the next parameter and saying, oh, aha, like it's 2 bytes, it's 0 because the car's off, or it's an accessory mode, it's not running, so values are not bouncing around. So yeah, make sure to not do this while the car is running so the values aren't changing. And it happened to be a 0, right? So for the next one, ethanol raw, you're looking at it like 148, and instead you see 2 bytes, 148 and 120, and you go, oh, okay, ethanol raw is also not just a single byte, but it's 2 bytes. Feedback knock, find knock learn, again, 0, so they're kind of hard to tell, and you have to keep mapping forward, and then it'll help you figure out whether or not those are single bytes or 2 bytes or whatever. So you go through that entire process. It actually goes by really quickly if you make sure to set up your data logger to look at the individual bytes, and then go through on your Accessport in single gauge mode and change whatever data point or parameter you're looking at. Don't log it, because it'll start spitting out a bunch of crazy stuff to the ECU. Just change them one by one. Yeah, and if you do that, you should get all of this information very, very quickly. And then the last thing I have to add to this, or the last thing to look out for, is some parameters will spit out more than one byte, but you only need to look at one, right? So it's kind of weird. Like sensor voltage TGVR gives me 2 bytes, but I only need to look at this one. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I know that with this single byte, I'm calculating the information that I need. Formulas can be found for Subarus on ROM Raider. I think they've got other cars on there as well. So there's definition files that you can dig into and look for formulas. And for the most part, most of those formulas are going to match up, or at least be some derivative of that. And I think that is it. If you happen to have, if you happen to be on, the other thing is, depending on your tune, these 2 byte parameters, I think previously were small endian or little endian, and in this case, at some point they made a change and they flipped it to big endian. So when they're big, I think they need to be signed. I think that is about it. If you happen to be on the same version or version of the tune that I'm on, which is I think the most recent as of 4/9/2021, I can literally send you my configuration file for a Racecapture system, and if you have a Racecapture system, you can load it up and it should work right off the bat. If you don't, if you're not on the same tune version, you'll have to go through this exercise yourself. But it's really not too bad, and it's a really great way to pull all of the parameters that you wish you were logging while you were at the track on your Accessport and then tie them into a single location that tells you, how fast you were going, what you were doing to the car, where you were on track. It just makes all this information a lot more valuable. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'll try to help out. I'm just learning about this and kind of grinding through this as I figure it out. So I'll try, but no promises on whether or not we get anywhere. And hopefully for those of you guys who are looking to do something similar, that you find this useful. All right, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you at the next video. Take care.